a seat, everyone. Thank you. Hello, and as Reverend Nina said, I am Kathy Wilder, and I have the great privilege of being the executive director at Camp Stevens up in Julian, and thank you so much for having me today and inviting me. Camp Stevens is your diocesan camp, and we are neighbors. You're very close by, and I hope you'll take me up on my invitation to come visit. And I've been telling all of your fellow congregants this at all the services, but we do have pie. So that'll get you there. I'll buy you a pie myself. Anyhow, I also want to just mention that we today are gathering on traditional Kumeyaay land. The Kumeyaay people have lived here for 12,000 years. It's a phenomenal period of time, across 600 generations, and I just want to honor and share their commitment to justice and reconciliation and healing. Let me start by telling you a little story about myself. When I was a kid, I had appointed myself the welcome wagon at my church. I would hang out at the coffee and donut table, which I'm super happy to see you all have still. And I was 10 at the time, so I was that kid hanging out at the table. And I would talk with everybody and make sure everyone got settled in okay. And one Sunday I met a new person named John, and he was great, and I showed him around the church and made him feel at home, and we talked for several Sundays in a row. And about the fourth Sunday, I realized that John was talking about that he lived in a tent. And on the way home in my mom's Volvo station wagon, I was processing verbally about the discrepancies that I felt about what I knew and loved about John and what the world had told me about him. And as I went on and on exuberantly, my mom finally pulled the car over, which typically meant I was in trouble, so I got quiet. My mom turned to me and said, "Kathy, all you need to remember is that every person has value. Every person deserves love. It doesn't matter where he sleeps. It matters that he's a person who's a part of our community and our family." In that moment, the world got a lot bigger for me. And as a caretaker by nature, I took this as marching orders. And I've really built my life work around this idea and finding ways to live it out. What's harder to role model about this in our society is that that kind of love applies to ourselves as well. That sort of self-care. And I've been thinking about that in relationship to today's gospel. What really stood out to me, besides Simon's mother-in-law getting up immediately after being healed and serving people, that's amazing, was that Jesus seemed to do something that was really human and special. He was in high demand for healing, and he really needed to slip away for some rest and restoration. He had been healing people all day, and the need was endless. Instead of just pushing through and completely draining his personal resources, he chose to take time away so that he could carry on the next day in the next town and on and on. And I'll be honest, the introvert in me really connected with Jesus in that moment. Now, I don't know about you, but stories that I hear about Jesus or parables that Jesus tells, I really consider to be a roadmap to life. And in this moment, I think he is showing us to love ourselves and rest so that we may keep doing the important work of sharing his radically inclusive and healing love in the world. I'll go so far as to suggest that it is actually impossible to navigate sharing this love with the whole human family without experiencing and believing that we ourselves are worthy of this love. And this love applies to us. Accepting that we are worthy is the first step into an expansive, generous, loving human family that celebrates our inextricable connection together. Now let's face it, the need in the world is greater and messier than ever. From the Gaza-Israel crisis to the ever-growing divide in politics, the looming costs of climate change, the crush that we feel from systemic racism, and not to mention the rise of depression among our kids. There's a lot to hold together. I just got back from the Episcopal Camps and Conference Center's annual conference, and we stayed at a place called Camp Beckwith in Alabama. It's right on the edge of the Panhandle. And during this conference, because we're camp people, we have a wellness day, which normally includes exploring the area. And on this day, we visited the Heritage Museum in a small city in the city of Mobile called Africatown. The museum features an exhibit on the Clotilda, which is the last known ship to bring Africans to the US. I learned this. Did you know that bringing Africans to the US became illegal in 1806, 60 years before the Emancipation Proclamation, because slaveholders were concerned about uprising? The exhibit was absolutely incredible, including voice recordings from one of the oldest survivors of one of the stolen Africans. He recorded interviews with Zora Neale Hurston. I don't know if you've read any of her books, but she's also an amazing writer. And she wrote a book called Barracoon that documents these stories. What I noticed from his firsthand account storytelling was the journey of healing that happened for his community. Because they were new to being enslaved by people, they often would just overpower overseers who were trying to hurt people in their community. And once they were freed, they began pooling money together to get back to Nigeria. And once they realized that would never happen in the society, they used that money to purchase land from the same men who brought them here. And they built Africatown. And there they helped each other build houses, created a church, formed their own governing system, created a school that still exists today. This community created a space which Kosola described as a place they could finally breathe and rest and be themselves. They built a space where community members felt supported and everyone could restore. And they did this because even in the face of extreme disenfranchisement, injustice, and harm, they knew they deserved peace. They knew they deserved love. They knew they deserved rest. And they did this as a community to lift each other up. And generations later, their grandchildren and great-grandchildren are carrying on this legacy through the museum, continuing to support the community, and leveraging support for the Mobile Technical School, which has educated thousands of students. Well, the example of Africatown is a unique and beautiful example of high-level resilience. I think we can learn from this community that this whole self-care, rest, and restoration thing cannot happen alone. We must support ourselves and each other to take rest. We need to make space right here at church to give people a place to breathe and be themselves just as they are. You gotta take a sick day when you need it. Take time to be with your family. Take time for yourself. Maybe visit your local Episcopal Camp and Retreat Center for a break. This is especially important as we do the important and life-changing work of the Episcopal community. Now, not everyone knows this about Camp Stevens, but about 80% of our campers are actually not part of the Episcopal Church. So when I get parents on the first day, I do a tour, and it's a really great chance for us to get to know each other better. And I show them the dining hall and the pool and the cabins where the kids sleep. And when I start to talk about our initiative for gender inclusion, I start by saying, because we are an Episcopal camp, and you can see everybody brace a little bit for kids will go to confession every day or something like that. And I say, because we're an Episcopal camp, we believe in creating an environment that is as inclusive and welcoming as possible. And I see them relax a little, and then the quizzical looks get on their faces, and you can tell they're just questioning. And I go on to talk about the amazing evolution of universal privacy that's happened because of this initiative and all the ways that this works logistically. And I finish by saying, our goal is that every camper feels safe and seen and loved, and that this is a place where they belong just as they are. And honestly, I don't really get a lot of questions about the gender inclusion policy. I get a lot of questions about the Episcopal Church. I believe that we as an Episcopal community, you, St. Bart's, Camp Stevens, and all the people, all of our Episcopalians in the world, are uniquely poised to take a lead in taking action in really healing harms that have been done in the world. It won't be easy, and we will not be perfect as we do it. But I know that the best way for us to sustain ourselves in this journey is to create communities that support rest of our mind, our body, and our soul, a place where we can embrace and accept for ourselves too the radically inclusive love of God. And we will do this together. Grace and peace to you all.